Microphone.
Oh, wow. Here we go. What is
That's
going
it.
on?
That's it.
What's going on? What's going on, brother? Darth Vader?
That's it.
Vader?
Luke, I am your father. I don't know how that came out. That, that was probably absolutely. That was my worst Luke, Darth Vader
It was pretty bad.
impression ever. Right there. That was absolutely terrible. I should at least cover my mouth. Luke, I am your father. Is that better?
It was horrible. But however,
Ah,
we'll get him
thank you
next
for your
time.
honesty.
We'll get it. We'll get him next time. Here's a quick fact: Darth Vader was played by a voice was played by several actors, and one of them was James Earl Jones. So if you ever
Yes.
get a chance to go back and check out Darth Vader or any of the Star Wars, which it's crazy to me how I've gotten this far in life without really watching it. Well, it's not really crazy, and we'll really get into it on. I think part of that onto this episode. I guess it's not really a part of our culture. Star Wars isn't. So I had to go back and take a look at it. And it's an interesting saga to say the least. I don't think I was exactly excited about how it ended. However, the story it'll be interesting what Star Wars looks like 3,000 years from now when people go back and study, you know, the antiquities, our um generation, because it has a lot of truth to it, and you can see
They're
how a lot of these things are aligned.
gonna go back and it's gonna be in the history books. They're gonna say that
It
was our life. Star
that
Wars
war.
predicted the future.
What it's so here's the thing about Star Wars is that even in the rolling credits it says a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So essentially, they're saying that this Star Wars essentially is was history. And then if you go into a lot of science and a lot of history, they kind of say that there's a lot of history where we don't know how those people did certain things. You know, even now, supposedly no one knows how the pyramids got there and why the pyramids and then the Aztec, ruins are similar. And there's these pyramids that pop up and where they pop up. And then you ask the questions of why they would pop up that way. So if anyone, it gets really deep. You can get really caught up in those different thought processes of how, where, why, and then that kind of leads to: Are we the only ones here? Earth being here. Is there life outside of Earth that kind of helped it into it? And then that even goes into why gold as a as a resource is not is so important beyond most people just think gold and dollars, but because it's so finite and so on and so forth, it gets really interesting. But you all can you all can do you all can do that on another time. We all can talk about that on another time, but it's some interesting stuff.
All right,
It's
put it
some
in the chat, y'all, because I got a lot of stuff to talk about that right there. So put it in the
it
chat.
is it
You
is
probably want to hear what I got to say because I'm gonna open up the great book and show a lot of people a lot of things that they weren't expecting me to say. So if y'all want to
right.
hear what we have to say about it, put it in the
I think it'll be a dope conversation, after we finish a lot of these series, because this man series, we put I think I saw it, rebuilding the man. Is that what it was on some of our uh
Yes. Yes.
and so when I looked at it, I was like, okay, rebuilding the man, and we're really just deconstructing to rebuild is what
Mhm.
we're doing. So a lot of you all, if you all haven't went back and checked out some of our past episodes, I would even go back to the intro, which was 1, 2, 3 episodes ago, I think is what we kind of came up with. We had the
Building a
intro,
better man.
right? And I think we've done a really good job of putting time, what is it, the timestamps in the descriptions. So go back and, sometimes we kind of get off, and I know we're working on it, but it gets so interesting to us. We're having this conversation. So I think above all, we're getting so much growth and from it. And then, so we kind of get off topic at times. However, go back and go check those things out. There's a lot of interesting things that come up from it. We've asked a lot of different questions. Some of us still should be answering the question of who am I? I mean, as a part of deconstructing, we need to know, kind of figure out like who we are, and then we can kind of go and you can want to start from there. So that I think that was one of the questions I think a lot of us need to answer. And then and we're headed and we're here now. So where you want to start? I think we already know where we want to start, but
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Just to throw this in there, guys, if you're out there and you want to be a part of a group, a mastermind, as we talked about this before, how the community beacon stands as a symbol of a mastermind for many people across the nation and maybe even across the world. Listen, you can get in a little bit closer to both Mike and myself. Jump on the gathering. We'll put a link in the description. Jump on. We're going to have a couple of commercials coming up and things like that, ads coming up where you'll be able to get a little more information about what the gathering is all about, and you can jump on. All right. So we hope to see you in the gathering. Remember, there is a seat here for you.
the gathering, y'all. Be there, be square. Awesome, awesome, awesome place. Had an awesome discussion last week. Um, similar to what we're talking about now, identity. In regards to it, and everyone has a chance to speak. Everyone brings their own perspective. I had a mentor recently that said that wisdom is a part of wisdom is being able to take in other people's perspectives and being able to see where they're coming from, because that allows us to kind of broaden and widen our scope, because most of us, we know what we know, um, and it's our, it can be our side of the truth, but there's how are you seeing it. And that allows for compassion, which we spoke about last week in depth, having compassion. And that helps when you get to understand another person's perspective. All right. I think
Mm.
that was like the longest intro ever.
That's all right. That's all right. Let's get into it. Let's get into it. Today we want to definitely dive in. Last week we had talked about identity and modeling, and we want to get in a little more into modeling, maybe talk about some cognitive dissonance. I know that that was something that kept coming up. So I'm interested, brother. I'm interested, how we're going to start this. I don't know if you want to crack the egg and go ahead and see what's going on, man. Let's start to serve the meal up.
Already, brother. So cognitive dissonance, if you all can take a look at the screen, your screen, if you're not paying attention, but if you're on the road, then don't look at the screen. It says the discomfort we feel when holding conflicting beliefs or values. So last week we kind of went over values and exactly what they are, and how important they are into us becoming a man. We spoke on several values. If I went back and looked at my notes, compassion, patience, responsibility, and even gaining clarity. And so now we're saying, okay, what happens when we're holding two values that kind of seem like they kind of go against each other? I'm ready to hear it, brother. Let's go.
I like it. I like it. I definitely think that that's a good place for us to be at, because I think that this has a lot to deal with identity. As we discussed about identity, and even more importantly, self identity, understanding self, it comes down to a question: who am I? And we've been asking that question for multiple episodes. And, the honest thing is are you actually answering that question? Are you looking for? Because what I have found is that in my past is that I had multiple identities, and I don't mean like the like as in a diagnosis of of having multiple identities that are facing against one another. I mean how I show up when I show up. You'll be able to check out a little deeper dive of that in my upcoming book. But I thought about that and I started to write deeply on this thing because I realized that when I showed up at work, I showed up with one frame of mind and I spoke the language of those that were at my job. When I showed up with my church family, I spoke the language of my church family. When I showed up with my friends, I spoke the language of my friends. So there was multiple identities and I began to realize, listen, I just want to have one identity. The same type of jokes that I tell with the guys at the job, I want to tell them with the guys at church. I want to share those jokes with my kids. Now, think about that. Think about how many guys out there have multiple identities based off of this mindset that I'm possessing. Because now we're not talking about, you know, I guess there was a movie out there with Mr. Glass and the Beast and somebody else. And the three of them were all fighting against each other. I think it was called Not Unbreakable. Bruce Willis, Samuel L. Jackson, and I forget the other guy's name. But the Beast ended up having all of the multiple personality disorder. And they would come up and they would almost as if only one human could be in that human at a time. And one of them ended up being a beast, and he actually changed his physiology, his body construct, and became stronger. And it was very strange as well. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how we present ourselves in front of other people. And if that presentation is true to ourselves, because when you start to think about cognitive dissonance and the conflicting results between congruous beliefs, you start to have this disorder that causes you to divert from who you really are. And then the question comes back to the original question: who am I? Am I the guy that believes that I can tell the joke to the guys on the street like this? Or am I the guy that believes I need to uphold myself in front of my wife like this? Are they the same? Can I bring the same? At some rate, you don't bring the same type of conversation to every individual, but is it still the same person, the same personality, the same persona? Does my wife know that the jokes that I tell with the guys are those types of jokes, even if I don't share them with her? Does my pastor know that I joke like I joke when I'm on the basketball court? When you start to think like that, you start to realize that maybe you have one singular belief, and then you have, like the scripture teaches us in the book of Matthew, I think it was chapter 5, when it says, if thine eye be single, and it's talking about the light. When he talks about that light, he's talking about your soul, your spirit. If your spirit is single, but if it's not, if it's separate, if it has separate beliefs, then the darkness, how great is the darkness within inside of you? How great is the shadow over your own mindset? How great is the shadow over who you are? And is that the reason why you're not able to move forward? Is the reason why we have conflicting uh, uh, disagreements or arguments with our spouse, with our friends, with people that we say we are around, is the reason because we show up with one belief and then we leave with another belief? Are we living our true life? Talk to me, Mike.
Jeez. Huge. So what I hear is essentially people being out of alignment. You could be out of alignment. This is where this cognitive dissonance comes in. Not being and here's the thing, not being able to present oneself, whatever that may be, and if you don't even know what yourself is, like I love the movie you brought up because I happened to watch that a couple months ago, and I thought it was an interesting movie as well. Like you didn't know, he did the guy did an awesome job. It was that, anyways. Long story short, not being in alignment. So, are you having the same type of conversations you're having, or do these people, and really is it conflicting within yourself? Are you presenting yourself as one thing to one person, and not, because a person can be blunt, right? Like you can, but if someone just doesn't know that you are involved yourself in these different things, and you find yourself, whether it's consciously or subconsciously changing, then what that happens is it forms a hesitation, right? It makes you hesitate now to be what it is yourself, which tends to make you close up. Krishna, and then Sadhguru is where I heard it from, but he got it from Krishna. Spoke about a hesitation being one of the biggest sins, and we tend to hesitate because we're not in alignment. So this conversation we're having is striving for us to become in alignment with ourselves. You should be able to have similar conversations, because I think we would both have to admit that the contexts are going to be different. So me having a conversation with my friends at work is going to be a different conversation that I would have with my pastor, just based on the wording that I'm going to use. However, they all should show me being in alignment with oneself. Like your pastor or your wife shouldn't shouldn't be not shouldn't. I don't want anybody to shit on themselves, but it's alarming to come into a situation and say, "Man, this is a totally different person. Like I don't know this Joe, right? Like I don't know this Mike. If I was on the other side of a wall, and I'm coming around the corner and I hear someone telling a joke or whatever, or talking, and I'm like, well, I wonder who's talking like this. And you turn the corner and it's your significant other, it's your father, it's your mother, it's whoever it is. That comes as a shock to people because I would imagine that these people want to know all sides of you. Um, so one should strive to be in alignment with oneself, whether they're at work, whether they're with their spouse, whether it was. So what? Here's the question: is like, what makes us hide these different parts of ourselves? So I'm curious to know what would make a person be one way, and their significant other doesn't even know this side of them.
I Man, I think that's the perfect question. I think that's the perfect question. What makes that happen? I I tend to believe that it's poor self-awareness. And I only think that that is a piece of it. I think it's a piece of it. I believe that, especially as men, can't speak for a lady, but as a man, it's there's a certain place inside of us that desires to exude, to conquer, to be at the head of whatever it is. In society nowadays, it seems like it's more about just fitting in. It's not even about being the leader always. I feel as if, as a man, it's in our DNA to lead. Wherever you go, you see men leading. But in this day and age, that's kind of lost. There's not as many men leading. Now, you're the statistic guy, but if you look, you go back 60 years, 50 years, you go back half a century plus, and man led the household. You go back far enough, women didn't even get jobs. Working out of the house was not even considered to be really work. Nowadays, when you start talking about being a housewife, There's a consideration for what you actually do, what a woman does as being a housewife. There's a consideration for that. It's like, listen, if he's out there making such and such money, but you are ensuring that there's food on the table, that there's milk inside the refrigerator, that the bills are being paid, that the house is clean, how much would it cost to actually hire people to do all of those things so that he can just come home and rest his nerves or whatever it is? And then you flip that and you say, well, now the woman carries the baby, but the man stays home because the woman is bringing in the cheddar. So now he stays home and he delivers the children to whatever schools there are. He takes them out to the soccer games. He cooks the dinner. He washes the dishes, whatever it is. There's a different presentation of men nowadays. And I know I don't want to touch too deep into the biology of this, but there's another side of that too, Mike, where there are men who are choosing that they don't want to be the male of the household. And so there's this whole new perspective of what it is to be a man, what it is to be male, what it is. And I think that there's a rising disillusion. And that rising disillusion is causing an aversion. People don't have a good, men may not have a good model to model themselves after. At a certain point in time, you go back half a century and a man was a man, quote unquote. I remember I was sitting at the fire station and I was speaking with a man who was, I think he was in his 60s. And he said to me, men just aren't men like they were when I was coming up. I said, He said, you know, in the old days, you knew a man. He knew how to work with tools. He worked hard. He was laborious. He went out and he just named all of these things that quote unquote men do. That's what he named. He mentioned fixing things at home, going off to hard work and performing labor and working hard. All of these things were associated. And notice I only said a few things. They all had something to deal with work. And he
Right.
mentioned those things to denote what a man was. But when you look at it today, it's like, no, you don't have to do that. There's so many other things you could do. Now, some men are dancing. They might be into ballet. There's an illusion. And that's why I love, if y'all want to go back and see our old talk on the identity of what a man is and what a male is, because we're alluding to that right now. But when you start to think about that, it's like there's this illusion now on what a man is. And I think that we did a well job on defining the difference between a man and a male. But when it comes down to this cognitive dissonance, the differences in beliefs, I think, comes from a little bit from our environments, nature, nurture, and our environments. And because of that, you have these different perspectives that arise. And as a person tries to act out their life or model their life based on the perspective that they see or the perspective that they choose, they end up leading a life like that. But granted, if you change circles, you may change perspectives. And
Amen.
if you change those perspectives, you may show up as one guy amongst that new circle. And if you go back to the old circle, you may revert to the old guy. And now you
Ecology.
have cognitive dissonance because the two may not agree.
I'm even hearing from the cognitive dissonance between the nature versus the nurture.
Mm,
Like a lot of us are, and I started smiling because someone sent me uh, a video of these young boys dancing, and they were dancing in what anyone who saw it would describe as it being very feminine. So you can already imagine the type of people that these men are, these young boys are probably being raised in very in feminine surroundings, right? So even we get to talking about the modeling, like you can't really blame the kids because the kids are just doing what they think they're supposed to do. But then there is something within a man that does want that does come out. So now it's conflicting. Your nature versus your nurture is conflicting. How many times have we said, you know what, this just doesn't, we're in the midst of doing something and you might say, this just doesn't seem right. This just doesn't feel, it's going against something. I can't quite put my hand on it, but there's just something there. And most people will, some people will continue doing it until there's no longer that there. And some people will go and search out, okay, well, what made me feel this kind of way, which gets back to that same question. What makes a person kind of become conflicting in nature? And you hit it on the head. I wrote down acceptance as part of one of the values that I think most people would have as a higher value. People do want to be accepted and they want to be a part of something. And I think back 50, 60 years ago, it was okay to be a man in a certain kind of way. But once we started questioning these different things, we started to leave it
Mm,
wide open to, what kind of, and there's nothing wrong with with getting with growing. However, is it effective? And we know now, let's all just agree that it's not. 60, 70 years later, it's not effective. We just from what we're seeing. And so when we're not accepted, now this can lead into other things, which is like shame and guilt. I need
mm,
one day I promise you, I will put on here so we can just go directly to this chart. But shame and guilt are at the bottom of this consciousness chart that I have. I always use it to kind of check where I'm at and where I'm making my decisions from, or my mode of thinking. You know, I'm like, okay, well, is this coming? Could this possibly coming from a place of shame and guilt? And then we can call the distinction between shame and guilt. Shame is going to say that I'm violating someone else's values, which happens a lot nowadays. Sometimes we find ourselves doing things that are right, but they're not righteous. But we're doing it because it's the right thing to do in the day and age that we're in, but it's not righteous according to any kind of sacred book, text, or law. We're just going against it because nowadays it seems what it's supposed to be. And then you have guilt, which is the cognitive dissonance, which is I'm violating my own values. So it's really coming back to this cognitive dissonance, lack of, and then having the model of what we're basing these things on. What is our rule and guide in becoming a man? We really dove deep into that on the first, might have been the introduction or the first episode. So it would behoove us to go back and check that out. But how are we? How are we? And who are we modeling? So now we start to say, you mentioned something, brother, that you were having a conversation with a man. And he said, I remember 50, 60 years, like it was a man, you could be a man's man, which I think most people still want. Most people still want the man's man. Maybe we could be a little bit more gentler, coming out of I would say going back, the man's man would probably be like the silent generation. If you ever went back and looked at the silent generation, the people who were born prior to like 1940s, so to speak, is you had the man's man that didn't say anything. They just kind of grinned and bared it, had the laborious work as you spoke about, knew how to fix a bunch of different things, so on and so forth, to now where it's kind of like we kind of just don't know, right? And if you're 5 generations in without seeing a quote unquote man, how do you model it? Well, we're going to look at these idols that they give us. They're going to give us the idol of a football player or basketball player. They're going to give us the idols of an actor or actress or whatever it is that they're putting on the screen. They're going to give us those. They're even going to give us, and y'all might want to hang me on this, but I've been doing a lot of thinking. They'll give us an idol of what they thought Martin Luther King Jr. would look like to us. So now you're modeling it on Martin Luther King, and if you really do a deep dive into it, he may not necessarily be the person that you would want to model your life on if you really looked at who he was. But we asked for it because most people are looking to see what they model it off of, and then we're taking in what exactly has been given to us, when it probably would behoove us to go and look for it within our own communities and neighborhoods, like going up to these men's men and having a conversation with the person that's sitting in front of us and saying, okay, this is where I'm at. I'm looking at you. I'm seeing how you raise your family. I'm seeing how you interact in life. I'm seeing how you it is. I'm curious about this, and having those different conversations as opposed to looking at what's given to you from a Hollywood TV, now social media standpoint. Like, we
Mm.
have a lot of our younger kids who are looking up to rappers. And then we go back and we do we do the research on this, and we're like, especially when you come into your own self, you say, I don't know if I want. He's very artistic, he's very creative, but what he's saying, or what he stands for, how he comes about himself, that's not something I want to model myself off of. I don't really take into the different values and the morals that they're talking about. Yeah, maybe it gets me hyped to go to the gym, or whatever it may be. But as far as living it on a day-to-day basis, that's not what I want. That's not what I want for myself. So we have to pay attention to these things. Like, why isn't, you're seeing like a lot of these kids nowadays that are looking up to these characters that are put in front of them, which I'm calling idols, as opposed to their father figure. And when we're talking about a man's man, like, we really need to get to the point of having these kids be around men that they can actually touch. And I'm not even talking about a father figure. I'm talking about the father, because that's part of the child. Find out exactly what is going on so that they can be around that and have some kind of reverence for it. Because we don't really have that reverence for the man around the corner, or the man in the house, or should be in the house, like we have a reverence for these people and things that are outside of the house. So what is the model? Where are you getting the model from? All right, even where have you gotten your models from? Who is this? Because once again, now we have this. I'm gonna go back to Martin Luther King Jr. I'm not gonna get into all the distasteful things it was that he did. I'm gonna say just on him, the fact of him being a pastor and preacher, very um gifted guy, very gifted individual. But now you have 1,000 people that want to be pastors and preachers. How many do we need? All right, that was me
Listen,
thinking of some
this
stuff.
is this the community beacon, man, and it's not about putting people down. We talk about a lot of different subjects. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of my heroes, but I definitely know exactly where Mike is coming from. I know where he's coming from because I took the time to research him. And I think that that is the point that we must take away from his statement. Take that piece away from the statement, because if we had said somebody that the majority of people disagree with, if you had said somebody, if you had said Diddy, then there would have been so many people that have been like, yeah. But the thing is this is surface.
Surface.
That's that's what people are looking at. That's what children are modeling themselves after. Is surface results. We don't know the depth of the individual that we are modeling after. Bob Proctor would say, and he modeled this theory after Napoleon Hill's mastermind. He said, "What I do is I study somebody. I study them. I learn them. I figure out what type of person they were. I read their works. I look into how they lived. And after I do that, I set them down as a conscious being inside of my mind. And then I think, what would this person do if this were happening? This is much deeper than just saying, I listened to a song. What they say in that song, oh, let me do that. And I go pop, pop, pop. Or listening to a speech and saying, what did they do? Okay, let's march on Washington. And making a decision based off of something that is so surface. We don't take the time to do, as human beings, and maybe more specifically, maybe as men, we need to take more time, especially as young men, to see exactly what we are modeling. Because cognitive dissonance, it's arising out of that. When I was a kid
Yep.
and I was trying to figure out how to be a man, and I got a hold of Bone Thugs and Harmony, and I got a hold of the Wu-Tang Clan and Nas, when I got a hold of that, and Biggie Smalls, when I heard the style of life that they were living, I did not capture who they were outside of the studio. So my thought was, okay, this is how I wear my clothes. This is how I speak. This is the environment I need to be in. This is the activities I need to participate in, because these guys are these are my big bros. This is who I model my life after. Now, when I show back up at home, because I didn't understand how they showed up in front of their mother, so I had to model, I had to come up with something. But what ended up happening when I walked in the house, no, I didn't come up with anything. I just became the same kid that I was, that they were grooming. So now I have a different belief. The person that shows up at home when I walk through those doors, okay, yes, ma'am. Okay, wash the dishes. Okay.
For person on back end.
When I walked out the house and I got around the boys, hey, what's up, man? What up? All right, let's go do it. Yeah, bet. All right. So now I got two different beliefs. Here's the thing. When this happens, whichever one we feed the most, whichever one we love on the most, at some point in time, a choice is going to come up. And you're going to have to be one or the other. You can't, brother, I'll never forget. I shared this song with my boy. He told me, he was like, man, this was a good combo. In the car, Preacher Simmons coming from the church. We're going through this type of conversation like we're having now. I said, listen, let me tell you something. I had to get my mind right. Things were going on inside of my mind and I could not figure it out. And then I recalled the words of Mobb Deep. He said, what? I said, oh man, let me show you. And I pulled it up. That's what I did. And him and I listened to Shook Ones, the entire song together. Because I wanted him to understand, like, I was lost, but Mobb Deep, the way that they spoke was so straightforward. So straightforward. There was no hidden agenda. These dudes was in the thick of it. And they were having trouble. And I'll never forget when one of them had began to talk about how he could get shot, stabbed, or killed. He wasn't even rapping. It was called the interlude or the prelude, one of those two. I think it was the interlude. And he just started explaining that. I said, listen to this. This is the thing that made me know that what he's saying is what he is really going through, because he wasn't like a bunch of them guys that were out there or that came after him that were making up all these make believe things. He was saying something real, because no man would get on the radio and start talking about how he would easily be taken out by someone else. Everybody was always making themselves so big, like they could never get shot, never get got. And here this man is saying, I know that I could easily get shot, stabbed, or murdered. It could happen to me just like it could happen to the guy next to me or this guy over here. That's the reason why I am the way that I am, because when you look at me, there's not going to be some difference in character. He was one man. That was it. And I began to realize, hold on, am I really all the way that man? Am I the type of guy that if you show up in my house and you start acting a fool, I'm going to pull my knife out and stab you? No, I'm not. I'm not. You come to my mama's house, I'm not coming to, hey, dad. Hey, 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 what's going on here? If I get in a tussle or something, that's different. But did I have enough inside of me to think about that before someone else did? No, that wasn't me. I had to start to rethink. Then I thought about that Shook. This Shook One song is the is the mirror image of the scripture in the book of Revelations, where it talks about, I'd rather you be hot or cold, because if you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth. Now, that's the nice way of saying it. For all the saints, say amen. But for all the so called sinners that admit that they're sinners, watch it, that admit that they're sinners, they're like, you shook, son, because ain't no such thing as halfway crooks. That was the defining subject that I had for my son. Because I'm
Yeah.
like, listen, if you're listening to this music right here and you think you're something, let me tell you something. I was out there inside of the streets. I modeled myself after these jokers right here. And I put myself in the pickle because I desired to, because I didn't know what the pickle was. I didn't know what it was. Like I had this understanding of what I saw, what I perceived, but it was all the glitz and the glam. It was all the, hey man, if I pop off something, I'm always going to get away. No, I didn't always get away. I got a stab wound in the middle of my back that proves I did not always get away. Somebody got me. Somebody got me. And thank God that the shots that went over my head never touched my head. This is what I had to explain to him. I had to explain this to him. If you're
Yeah.
modeling that over there and you are not that over there, then you are not prepared for what that over there draws to you. So what you have is you have a disagreement of beliefs that are operating inside of your body. And if you continue to operate with this disagreement of beliefs, then one or the other thing is going to happen to you. But I advise you, make your choice up, because if you don't, your choice will be made for you. What'd you
Well,
say,
we said
bro?
by choice or by force. That's what we said leading into this
That's
into
what you
this
said.
conversation. Um, and it behooves them, and this is one of the value. I think this is probably when I look at men and we talk about value and worth of a man, is that conversation that you're able to have and communicate clearly with a child, going, I was there 13, 14 years old when I was like, well, I'm seeing what's being taught to me, the culture. That was one of the conversations we have is it talking about the subculture. But so we're talking about the culture of this thing, of what's being put in front of us, of what it's supposed to look like. So one of the key worths, and if we had to, we all have value and we all have worth. But to me, one of the things when I look at a man is the ability to communicate that with a younger person, a younger male, because it's going to be very hard for you to get that from the other side. They don't know what you're going through. I remember walking through the mall with my girlfriend at the time, and I remember I can never forget looking over at her, and I was just like, she was just like, do, you know what I mean? When, like everything was just all gravy, and I'm just aware of
Scanning.
the area, scanning
Yeah.
what's going on. Where's this person's hands at?
Yeah.
Is somebody have something going on? Somebody got something in their waist. Do I know this
On alert.
person? Where do I know this person from? And I'm looking over, and I'm like, you don't see every in my mind. I remember coming to that, or being conscious of that at the time. Like they're not, and I think that's how women should be anyway. So I think when women say they're not, in the sidebar, when women say they're not protected, that's what they mean. Because I think women should be able to walk around with their men in a way of where it's almost a
Mm.
carefree nature, where they feel like I don't really got to pay attention to these things because I have a man here, whatever that is. I can go into that Diddy thing, but I won't. But so that's a part. I'm almost there. But that's the part of a woman or lady, or excuse me, a man's worth or something that we can put towards it is to have that. I had on the screen earlier. A man has to have some depth to it, and what happens is that we are looking at a lot of different surface things. So that's why a lot of these young men think they can be rappers. They think they can be basketball players or whatever it is that they're seeing being put on it. But then when they are presented with, even drug dealers. I always say with I used to work with the youth. And so I was amongst certain communities. And I say, you know what, when you really go into these communities, 99% of these kids or people in this community they're great people. It's really only a handful of people who are raised in hell. And because of these handful of people who are really this thing, they're really killers, they're really robbers, they're really they're really a part of this lifestyle. You got a bunch of other people who are just attempting not to be prey to these people. So, in order for me not to be prey to these handful of people that have crazy histories, I can tell you some stories about the some of these people that I'm like, I always used to say, if I see this kid in the alleyway, I'm going the other way because I know where he comes from or he or she comes from. I know the abuse that they're going through, and they're smiling. Some of the people who you would think are like some of the, oh, they just so sweet. These are really, could be psychopaths, right? Like you really can't tell. But these other people who are have these, they're just decent people. They never really went there, but in order for them to survive and not be picked on, they have to put forth this facade. So
Or they have to become that to a
yeah,
certain level.
you have to get along. You want to get along, right? You're jumping in the car when you know you probably shouldn't be in the car, and this is when the mother's like, "Well, he was a good kid. He was a good kid, or she was a good kid." We all can attest to that. However, the environment or the ecology may cause them to feel like they need to go along with this way. That's why you need this person, you as a father, to have that conversation with the child. And he still may go that way, but guess what? The Bible says if you train up a child in the ways, because I'm not, they have
When he
some
gets
of us,
older, he's not going to depart from it.
right. So we have to we allow them to have the journey, but we also say, okay, well, here is the model. The model should not and cannot, the model should be the closest thing to the house. That would be the father. Try as you might, we look at the numbers and the stats, that is the number one correlation. That is it. However, if that person's not there, it can be the next best thing. Maybe the grandfather. That's a model that should be there. But let's talk about the men. But that's it. But once we get a certain amount removed, and you're dealing with people with certain different intentions. So the intention may be, I need these people to buy my CD. So I need to be the toughest person in the world on these CDs because I want these persons to feel like this is my identity is real. And then you can go into like some of these different, churches that you can't even touch the pastor. I need to. There's no depth in that, so we're just seeing one side of it.
One
So these are
side.
just two. Yeah, so we're seeing these two different coins, but that's why we need to get in depth and we need to show the depth. But what happens when the depth is not there? So now we're starting to reach out and we're looking at these different facades and we fall into the trap of this person's water is wetter than than what it is that I have.
Mm.
It just so now we have these different conflicting ideals, and our kids have these different conflicting ideals because of the culture that we're in now, especially with social media now. You got these kids wanting to be these influencers, and the closer you get to some of these influencers, you're just like, you really don't want. These people are beholden to certain things that you morally wouldn't value if you got close to it. And then some of these influencers might, but they're also putting in the work. These guys are streaming for 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 hours. They're editing on the background for another 4, 5, 6 hours on a 30-minute piece or a 1-minute piece or whatever it is. Like they're actually putting in the effort. And we're not seeing the effort. We're just seeing the results. And people are mimicking these results. Men are mimicking the results of these men, not other men, not knowing how much time they put into their effort. And some people, let's be honest, are just maybe naturally gifted, right? They might be naturally gifted, or they're around the right people, so on and so forth. And we're not actually seeing this. So being a man requires depth, requires being well rounded. So we can throw that into the criteria of it.
I like that, Mike. I like that. And I like the way that you're headed with that piece of the conversation. I'd like to add this. Let's think about Jesus. Let's think about Jesus as the perfect model.
As the per
Uh,
I can
Listen, I mean, this is my belief, Mike, your belief. I know we're on the same page with Jesus. I got that. But I want to speak this to not just those that believe in Jesus, but listen, anybody, not from the perspective of religion. I want you to think about Jesus as a model in this fact. The way that he walked was the same way that he spoke. See, here it is. You can go into a household, and if a child's being raised by a parent who tells them they need to do this, this, that, and the other, but they live the exact opposite, what on earth does that child model? Do they model your words or do they model your action? We're talking about building a man from the ground up. Then that means that we need to create a model
right,
that is worthy of being modeled. A model needs to, you should be able to think about a model and say, what would the model do? And then you should be able to see the model when they are not at their high aperture and say, oh, they're exactly alike. When they go into the 7-Eleven, it's the same thing as when they present themselves in front of the president. When they're wearing flip flops, it's the same thing as when they got a pair of Stacy Adams on, Johnson Murray. It's the same, or they got a pair of kicks on. It's the same thing. Matter of fact, I can learn how to treat my wife while my father is laying next to her on the beach, or while we're walking through the mall, or while we're sitting watching a movie at home, or while we're cooking dinner, or while somebody's doing the laundry, or while we're out with friends, or when they show up to a PTA meeting. Doesn't matter, because it's the same individual. It may not show up the same, but here's the thing, is the words and the actions, they should always line up at some rate. Like when Mike he was diving into that. You were diving into that just for a moment when you start talking about, I may not say the exact same jokes between my wife and the guys, but at some point in time, there should be something that lines up. Something that lines up. Like, I'm not going as far as the guys go because maybe I don't share this joke with my wife, but if my wife was in the room, would I be ashamed? No, no. It's just not the way we do. But no, I wouldn't be ashamed. Matter of fact, if she walked in the room, I look at, hey, baby, and then I finish my joke. Now I'm one man. So self-awareness, the ability to recognize you are separate from other people while also assessing your own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. That's what identity is, being self-aware. You got to establish your own beliefs, your own mindset, your own feelings. You need to know when it's your feeling or when it's just something that somebody else has projected out of themselves, and maybe you caught it and said, they got upset because of such and such and such. That means I need to be upset because, and that's what my 13-year-old does right now. He tries to figure me out. He tries to read me. If dad gets upset at such and such and such, that means he needs to be upset. If dad gets happy at such and such and such, that means he needs to be happy. That's what children do in those ages. They are modeling. So when we start talking about building a man from the ground up, my words and my actions need to align. So what does that mean about me? There's a scripture in the book of Proverbs, the 23rd chapter, verse 7. It says, for as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So that means I need to change my mindset, or I need to make sure my mindset aligns with the way I live my life. That's number one. Get my mind and my body to work together. And I'm not trying to tell you that that's the easiest thing. Because sometimes it's like ice cream. I'm trying to build abs, but I like ice cream. Y'all get what I'm saying? It doesn't work well. After I eat something in my mind saying, man, go ahead, get you a piece of that chocolate cake. Oh, man, don't just take a bite, man. Go ahead, eat the whole thing. And the chocolate cake is bigger than the plate. It's bigger than the entree. And then I turn to my son and I say, don't eat sweets. They gonna give you diabetes. Don't eat sweets. And I go through all this stuff. And then he look at me like, nah, this man gonna tell me, and look at what he's eating. It's 10:30 at night. He got 3 scoops of ice cream. He got chocolate fuzz. He done got himself a soda, got his hands in his pants, and he just sitting down with a bowl of ice cream. Doesn't align. What'd you say, bro? You might be on mute.
Mic check, mic check. Here I am.
There he is.
To that point, brother, children mimic what they see and they repeat what they hear.
Woo, that's deep. Say that again. Children mimic what
Repeat,
they.
yeah, children repeat what they hear and mimic what they see. They mimic what they see and they repeat what they hear. They're getting it from somewhere, even in the slightest. So, the brother spoke about the ice cream, 1000% correct. But if the child also sees the brother getting up in the morning and going for a run and going to the gym and making health his priority, you're going to see that the children are doing it. If you, your child is going to do it, even if just by happenstance, and if they get away from it, they know what they can go back to. The alignment part of it, most of us don't know what we value,
Woo!
like what we
Goodness.
value
Mm.
ourselves, our own identity. We don't know that because it's not that, brother. I always give you pushback when you use the word hard. It's not easy. It's because we don't take the time, and not even just we don't put the focus or the effort on putting it together. Like
Ooh.
we don't put the focus and the effort to say, and I know because I know the brother does it. I know the brother puts the focus and the effort to come up with his ideology or to go back on and see what his ideology is. You just can't give me something anymore. I'm not a child. I'm a man at this point. So you're going to give me something, and now I'm receiving this information. I don't take this information to just say this is the truth. This is what we're having a lot. A lot of opinions are being put forth, and people are running with it and taking it and saying this is the truth. We don't just. He's not just coming to this place and saying this is this because it's based on because you said it or someone said it. We go back and we try it and we put it within the fire. We take it and we say, hey, there's something to that. There may be something to that. Let me go back and put this to the test. We need to ought to be testing these things, but you can't even get to that point if there's no focus or effort. I've been
Mm.
having a something's been coming up around me around feelings. And I hear when we go back talking to a man's man, etc. At some point in time, while why feelings ought to be validated by yourself. Like I don't have to validate your feelings. It would be nice of me to do it, right? It would be, but it's not necessary. I don't have to do it. So if I do it, then just appreciate it, right? And I think we have the awareness and the empathy and the compassion to where the brother and I will validate a person's feelings. Just know that it's not a right of yours for us to do that. It's just
Ooh.
it's not a right. It's just that we have the empathy and compassion to take it into consideration because we're working on ourselves with our growth. And like I said at the beginning, it also adds to wisdom, right? Being able to be compassionate and empathetic and see something from another person's point of view because of
Mm.
their experiences. But we don't have to do it. I just want let me say that. So that being said, us as men are we are because we don't want to put forth the effort and the focus. We are attempting to feel our way through things that
Mm.
there's no reason for us to be doing it. I get it. And you should validate it. You should validate your own feelings first off. And if you did, you wouldn't even too much care about what it is that I say. But I get it. You want to most people want to be understood. I understand you. And I can see where you're coming from. But your feelings aren't real. So what I've been noticing amongst peers and definitely in the younger crowd is the wanting to feel their way through things, feel their way through business. Oh, I had a feeling and rely on this certain kind
Ooh.
of intuition without necessarily having a base for it. And you have to have a base. Intuition is a real thing. You do there it can be a real thing. But if you don't know yourself, then it's not a real thing. It's just it's a guess. And oftentimes it's not even a correct guess. So we have to get back to the point of being logical as we have to get back to the point of having ourselves getting to know yourself. Don't feel it, know it.
Gosh. Yes.
So if we get to the point of knowing, and then we can take that knowing and we can put it against our ruling guide. So there's no longer there's a time to rely on things, right? You're going through something. I remember the brother gave me the Bible one time. He was like, "Boy, go through it," because that at this point in time, I need a crutch because a part of my leg is broken. But there's a
Mm.
point in time when we have to get to the point of actually not going to relying on it, but it's a ruling guide. But we have to get to the point of knowing, like that's where we want to get to. And I noticed that because being a part of being a man relies on trust. You have to trust yourself
Ah.
to know. So we have to get back to that point. Feelings are great. They're extra information, right? They're extra sensory information. There's a reason why we feel these ways. Now, a feeling should really lead you back to being able to reframe an experience. I hope I'm not getting too technical with this, and I hope you people are following me. We are using our feelings to go back and look at a certain situation or experience, and now you have the ability to reframe that. So when we can go back, and so that's what a feeling is supposed to spark into you. Boom. Oh, something. This I feel something. Okay, so what makes you feel this way? Oh, this happened. But now as an adult, I can go back and look at what happened and say, "Oh, well, I'm an adult now. I can see why this is not this way. Okay, so I don't even need to feel this way anymore, especially if it's a negative feeling and sometimes positive. I don't need to feel negative or positive about this thing because because of the way I experienced it. Because some of us, sex could be this way. Some of us go
Mm.
to the feeling of sex and it's a, quote unquote positive experience, but then at times it can be a barrier to certain things. It can be a barrier to getting to know a person. It can be a
Mm.
barrier getting to know because we're feeling like we feel like this is the right thing to do at this stage. But and we've never really went back and looked at it like, well, we operated this way, from 15 to 25. Our brains wasn't even fully developed. Now, and we're still operating according to that. Now we're 40 years old and we're going back and we're doing it because we feel like this is the right time, as opposed to knowing it's the right time. And then you know it's the right time when you can go back to, you could check that against your ruling guide. Me and the brothers' ruling guide happened to be the Bible. We can go back and check it against the Bible and say, well, I know this isn't the right time because I took it to the Bible and the Bible is stating to me as a ruling guide, okay, so now I'm back on track, right? So now I'm
Mm.
back in alignment. But we're doing things, we're out of alignment because we're not taking it to this ruling guide, or we're not really knowing, but we're feeling these things. These feelings that get out of hand. Effort, but it goes back to this focus of being a man, and that's why we are taking the time to do this, because there's the effort and focus. How do we find out what our true values are?
Yes. That's it.
We have
That's
to
it.
go, what Joe, and that way when I go to Joe and I say, Joe, well, what do you value? He's gonna say, Mike, I value this, this, and this. These five things is here's the camera. These five things is what I value. And now I can go back and I can say, well, I value this, and this. Well, you know what, brother? We don't really align on whatever it is. I can still respect you as a person, as a man, but we don't really align on this. So maybe we don't need to be in the same or going through certain things together because we're not in alignment with each other. As opposed to me violating what I value because I want to be around Joel because I can get some type of something of a transactional nature, and I go down
Mm.
that path, and now I'm out of alignment and I'm doing things that would shame me or that would bring guilt to me or would bring really ultimately death. You know what I mean? Or
Mm.
hesitation. But I know what we align with, and there's nothing. And here it is. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, brother, and then now maybe I can start to create boundaries. Well, let me just. I guess I can listen to what you have to say because maybe I'm sure, not I'm maybe I'm sure you can give me some information that I can take back and try. But now,
Mm.
but what happens is I'm remaining in alignment. I'm gonna say one last thing. This is
Mm.
what happens in the context of business a lot, especially now when we have all of these gurus and all of these so-called experts and all of these people that are really charlatans, and they're
Mm.
giving us, and maybe they're not, maybe they could or could not be, but they're giving us all this information, and we look at them from afar and we say it is good because of what they're showing us. But we haven't done the depth, we haven't done the research, we haven't taken the effort or the focus on this person to, and I found this out. I was like, I don't want nothing that these people really have. Ultimately these people, what's going on is misery. Like, I don't want that. I don't want to be on a private jet miserable, you know, ready to
Mm.
contemplating suicide. I don't want to be on a private jet and my kids don't want to be around me. I haven't spoken to my kids in 20 or 30 years, or my family in 20, 30. I don't want to be on some island doing things that I shouldn't be doing. I don't want to be chasing people down a hallway and punching them and kicking them when they want to get away from me. Like, I don't want that for my life. I don't want to be involved in things like that. That violates certain values that I have. So maybe I'm okay with what it is that I not maybe I am okay with where I am and what is going on and what it's taking me to get to where I am. I don't want to have to rob, cheat, and steal to get to look a certain kind of way. That is not of value to me, right? So
Mm-mm.
this is the importance of this conversation. Like, this is the importance. Like, who am I as a man? And no matter what it is, like I gave that example with Joel, maybe in this instance, this is an example of his values being one way and my values being no way. But we can still come and say, okay, well, we don't agree on this, so maybe I don't. But now I can establish these certain kind of boundaries, and I'm going to respect you as a man. This is why you can have two men that don't agree on something, but they're strong in their ideology. Men, I want to repeat, men not agree on something and still have very, very civil conversations, and still can create some things that are great. But these are this, and not one person having to violate their values.
Mm. I love it, man. I think you hit the
Yeah,
nail on the head because that really is not operating out of your emotions, but cognitively moving forward, thinking about what you're doing and having that establishment of your own personal values and your own personal morals, being able to try those out to see if they are really yours. There's nothing wrong with having the foundation come from your father, your grandfather. But at a certain point in time, you hit a certain level, certain age where you need to research those things for yourself and make sure that those values that was taught to you are truly your values. And then you take those in, you own up to them. I also think the correlation between the foundation coming for you and I coming out of our Bibles, it makes it that much more clear because listen, that thing
right,
was
right.
already written. It's already been operated on. It's already been tried and proven.
Why?
It's not
Why?
like
I was gonna say, why reinvent the wheel? You know what I mean? It's nothing wrong with getting more, like we're growing. But why reinvent it when you take it back? And I can almost guarantee, and I know I cut the brother off. My apologies, brother. I can guarantee that the brother go back and look at it and say, "Well, there it is, all
there it
along."
is.
Like,
There it is.
yeah, it is.
Even with some of the men that I listen to and that I even consider to be some of my mentors, when I hear the words they say, I say, huh, I found that already. Uh-huh. Thanks for the reference. Now I'm gonna
Yeah,
go and study that a little bit more because they're coming from the same place, the same location. These are the reasons why we are drawn together because the older we get, I believe the more our synchronicities bring us together. Your circle brings you together. So just make sure your circle is good. There's a Tony Collette said, the better you know yourself, the better your relationship with the rest of the world. That's the better it's going to be
yeah,
because you know who you are, you know where you stand. And if you develop the courage, like Maya Angelou taught, the courage is one of the greatest things, the greatest virtues that a person can ever develop is courage. Why? Because you have to have enough courage to believe in what you believe in without fading. Maya Angelou stood the test of time. She was brilliant. So become courageous. And what we're talking about now, what we're ending this conversation is not cognitive dissonance, it's cognitive self alignment.
mm,
That's what we need to do. We need to self align ourselves. It's just like a car, y'all. Don't don't go try to tell somebody else that their car is riding off the road when you're pressed so hard to keep your car in the center of the road and your hands are looking like this. You at 1 to 7 and every muscle in your upper body is constricted Because if you let that thing go, you're driving straight across the road, across the median. You're going to be in somebody's yard on the other side of the road because you have not gotten your own alignment. Everybody needs to go check their car and make sure it is aligned. And when I say that,
Mm.
I'm saying check your mind and your heart because the greatest decisions are made between 18 inches from what makes your heart beat to what makes your mind flow. It's the capacity of your soul. So keep it real, y'all.
Love it, man. I love it. Guys, we appreciate you all. It's another hot episode, man. I think it's dope. And I guess we'll see you.
Oh, homework, Mike.
Oh, go ahead.
Anybody out there, if you're doing this homework, put it in the chat. We'd love to know. But this is what I like to see you do. Write down your values. That's it. Do you know 'em? Write down your values.
That'll be dope. Yeah, yeah. Give us. I think that's awesome. Put your values in. DM us, and maybe you don't want to put it in there, and we can go back and go through them. Awesome, guys. Next week, we appreciate you all. Peace.